This conversation is always evolving a little bit, but if we start with the laws that are in effect right now, we have, of course, what I think of as the original five. California, the CCPA has been later modified a few times. Virginia, Connecticut, Colorado, and Utah. And then, we kind of move into the 2024 states. So Florida, Texas, and Oregon went into effect July of last year, Montana in October, and then we move into 2025. So now we're getting a little bit of a landslide. As of January 1 of this year, Nebraska, Iowa, Delaware, and New Hampshire went into effect. New Jersey on January 15th. So that's where we are right at this moment in time. But if we came back and did this webinar in a few months, we have Tennessee coming into effect July 1st of this year, Minnesota on July 31st, Maryland October 1st, and then three more in 2026, Rhode Island, Kentucky, and Indiana, beginning of next year. So that's what the landscape looks like now and sort of through the rest of 2025 into 2026. But if past patterns hold, we'll have another 5 to 7 laws probably coming into effect sometime, maybe in the latter part of this year, the beginning part through, mid of next year. So the map continually changes. The patchwork is getting a little less patchy. We have more areas filled in, but that's where things stand as of today. I think these laws still have maybe more in common than they don't. And I think from a practitioner's perspective, we are still able, with a couple of really prominent exceptions, to have a sort of single compliance path that covers almost all of the obligations under these state laws. So just to highlight some of the similarities, first, there are the thresholds. Almost all of these laws, I'm probably going to say almost all in a lot of instances, but almost all of them have thresholds for applicability that's tied to the volume of data that's processed in a state or sold. There are prominent exceptions to that, including Florida, which has a very unique threshold, in Texas, which doesn't kind of adopt that same framework. But that is still largely true, that there are thresholds for processing that are intended, it maybe not successfully, to carve out kind of the smallest of small data processing businesses. They all have very broad definitions of personal data, and they all implement sensitive data definitions that have a lot of common elements across them. Although, of course, states here and there, some will add some very unique data elements to sensitive data elements. They all feature fairly broad exemptions. With the exception of California, all of the states exempt kind of HR data and B2B or professional contact data. There are broad exemptions in all the laws for data that's regulated by other privacy laws like HIPAA or Gramm-Leach-Bliley. In some states, those are sort of entity level exemptions where if part of your business is regulated by one of these regimes, all the data is out, and others, it's kind of that particular data stream. But you do have the benefit of those exemptions. Kind of entry level exemptions, like, do we exempt nonprofit organizations? That's one that's been chipped away a little bit, where it's, more of a mixed bag. All of these laws sort of preserve that controller processor dichotomy that we're all familiar with from other global privacy laws. Of course, California calls it business service provider, but that kind of notion of an entity that's primarily responsible or obligated under these laws because they have the means and method of controlling the data versus their vendors or service providers who are largely obligated via contract. That's preserved in these laws. I think most importantly, all of these laws remain laws of kind of notice and consent, either, opt in for sensitive data or certain data processing operations, or opt out for things like basic data sales. But that framework is largely true across all 20 laws. They all have individual rights. Of course, there's some squishiness in which rights are offered in which states, but you have that kind of core fundamental base of rights of access, deletion, that is uniform across all of the states, the rights to opt out of sales and certain kinds of processing. And then some kind of governance pieces. So, requirements for vendor contracts, requirements for assessments of certain high risk processing activities, not fully uniform across all 20 states, but I think, fairly broad and expected in these laws. So I know we're going to talk about some of the differences, which really are crucial and are starting to emerge this year. But we're still in a position where when a new state has come online, there's kind of a core playbook or a core set of menu items that the state laws are based upon. So we have yet to have a state really choose to break the mold. There have been some proposals that would have done that, but we haven't seen that yet. And, where I started, you're still able, if you have to comply across the board, to chart, for the most part, a single compliance path, if that's desirable to your organization, where you're not kind of treating different states, differently, where you have a real true kind of patchwork approach.